Got it. All right. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday and welcome to our Lunch and Learn session. I'd like to introduce Peter Conrad. Peter is a writer, filmmaker, and teacher. He teaches filmmaking and videography at Humber College in Toronto. He has a Master of Fine Arts in documentaries and has done documentary, corporate, and educational work. And he owns his own production company called Conrad Entertainment. Peter, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks a lot, Juliana. Let me just activate the screen here, hopefully. Let me know if that's showing up, as I hope it is. When I first suggested wandering as a topic for today's Lunch and Learn, I thought it was an obvious fit for a studio named WANDR, at least given the little bit I know about the studio's approach to creative work. But when I started to wonder about what I was actually going to talk about, I realized I needed to do some research. So I decided to go for a walk. My first form of research. There's a reason the famous saying about walking is solvitur ambulando. It is solved by walking. The original use of the phrase is attributed to St. Augustine in the 5th century BC. It was his apparent response to the ancient debate about the infinite divisibility of time, which would mean that we would never be able to arrive at a destination. We would always be on the way, as it were. Augustine's response apparently was simply to say it is solved by walking, meaning I think that the journey was, in its own way, a worthy destination. Walking is an end in itself. In recent times, the phrase has taken on more of a practical meaning. If we simply go out into the world and put one foot in front of the other, we can solve our problems. This is how most people interpret the phrase now. But is it true? Francis Sanzaro says it is. He's a climber, a mountain athlete, and author of Zen of the Wild, a philosophy for nature. As he argued in a recent essay for the New York Times, walking is good for us, beneficial for our joints and muscles, astute at relieving tension, reducing anxiety and depression, a boon to creativity likely, slows the aging process, maybe, excellent at prying our screens from our face, definitely. Sanzaro leads us to the work of Irish brain researcher Shane O'Mara, whose 2019 book, In Praise of Walking, explores the scientific research and benefits of perambulating. O'Mara also writes about walking and other brain-related topics on his Substack newsletter, Brain Pizza, where he contends that the impact of walking goes far beyond physical benefits. And I quote him here, sedentary living slowly changes aspects of your personality for the worse. You will be less open to new experiences, you will become less extroverted, and you will be less agreeable. Sedentary living makes you more withdrawn and inward-looking, and in turn, social isolation predisposes you to diseases of the brain, such as dementia. He has some quick fixes, if you like, 5 easy walking wins to get you out of your seat and away from your desk. First one is with regards to your commute. He suggests getting off the train or the bus a stop or two early on both ends of your commute. You can add thousands of steps of walking to your daily routine without really even noticing that you're doing it. If you drive to work, he suggests just parking as far away from the office as you can, and then walking that extra distance in both the beginning of your day and at the end. Walk before eating to take off the edge of your appetite. If you're heading out to a cafe, for instance, choose one that's a 10 or 15-minute walk away so that you, again, build in a few extra 1,000 steps without even really trying. We all know about this one. Stand up and walk around the office every 25 or 30 minutes, set an alarm on your phone or your computer to prompt you to get up. Brainstorm creative work while walking instead of doing it at your desk. He suggests putting down some questions about what the nature of the project is that you want to explore, and then head out for a walk. While you're walking, you'll find that you generate more ideas than you would if you were just sitting, and you can record them through a voice recorder app or take a notebook with you as well. And then lastly, he suggests having a walking partner. He reminds us that we evolved as social walkers and we enjoy the process. What's interesting is that we actually sync up our breathing and our walking pace with the other person as we're walking with them. And this social interaction beyond these sort of physical benefits is also clearly good for us. Francis Sanzaro doesn't disagree with any of this, but thinks we may have it backward. He wonders not about what we can get out of a walk, but what a walk gets out of us. After a series of unsatisfying interactions with wild environments, Sanzaro pivoted to much more mundane walks in his own neighborhood. It was there he discovered what the walk wanted from him: a connection, an intimacy. He says, I started walking around my neighborhood more. Compared with those wild places, this was unremarkable. But I turned it into a practice of sensation. I listened, I felt, and in a remarkable way, the neighborhood came alive. My senses, once atrophied, came to life, and with them, so did the world around me. Sanzaro argues that we need to rid ourselves of the assumptions we have about our environments. Again, quoting him, my strolls taught me that walking truly is a discipline and an art. The discipline of removing assumption, thinking that something is going to be beautiful, does as much damage to a place as thinking it will be ugly. And it's the art of attention. He encourages us to leverage the automaticity of our body, that ability we have through our nervous system to control our movements without much input from our executive control or thinking resources. This allows us to use those thinking resources to pay attention to the stuff of the place that we're in. This is what the walk wants to get out of us. Even Thomas Jefferson, 200 years ago, more than 200 years ago, third president of the United States, he was on board with this idea. The object of walking, he said, is to relax the mind. You should therefore not permit yourself to even think while you walk, but divert your attention by the objects surrounding you. Writer Barry Lopez echoed the value of presence and attention in his essay, A Literature of Place. Lopez reflected on his own experience of place and its impact on his writing, but I think his ideas apply equally to all of us. And I quote him here, over time, I have come to think of these three qualities: paying intimate attention, a storied relationship to a place rather than a solely sensory awareness of it, and living in some sort of ethical unity with the place as a fundamental human defense against loneliness. If you're intimate with a place with whose history you're familiar, and you establish an ethical conversation with it, the implication that follows is this: the place knows you're there. It feels you, you will not be forgotten, cut off, abandoned. The key, I think, Lopez continued, is to become vulnerable to a place. If you open yourself up, you can build intimacy. Out of such intimacy may come a sense of belonging, a sense of not being isolated in the universe. So, how do we become intimate with a place? How do we learn to pay attention to it? Well, you could do worse than start with Keri Smith's creative and useful how-to book on wandering and its sister activity, Paying Attention. She calls it the WANDR Society, a book in which she explores the activities and thinking of like-minded people who devote or devoted large parts of their lives to the practice of wandering. The list of names that Smith connects to the WANDR Society is illustrious, including Walt Whitman and Henry David Thoreau. But Smith intends the book not as a devotion to those lives, but rather as a guide in our own pursuit of a wandering practice. Here are some of her suggestions. Document everything while you wander. Sometimes I do this, sometimes I don't. I like to cultivate paying attention for its own sake without necessarily having evidence of that process. But admittedly, when I do document as I walk, it intensifies the attention I'm paying. So I think it's definitely worthwhile. As Whitman says here in this illustration, you must habit yourself to the dazzle of the light and of every moment of your life. Take pictures is one of Smith's suggestions. Everybody loves to take pictures during a wander. It heightens your awareness of details in your environment and develops your ability to see connections where you thought none existed before. The set of the images you're seeing now and in the next few slides are things that I've shot during various walks. This one's actually interesting in my own neighborhood. I call it the love-hate battle. The shot on the left is the first one. Whoever started this whole tagging process seemed to express a love of hate. Then a few days later, somebody came along and decided that was a message they didn't agree with. So they added their own love tag to the mix, which I thought was pretty terrific. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. Either the hate mongers returned or somebody else came along and skillfully removed the additional love tag, and we returned to this love, hate, or whatever the intention was of the original combination. Not a great outcome necessarily as far as I'm concerned, but it is what happens when you pay attention. It's not all sweetness and light. Keri Smith also suggests writing down notes and observing colors or patterns. This was from a wander through the University of Toronto I did back in August. I liked both the symmetry of the mid-century architecture in this shot, but also the way the circles of light and shadow created their own conversation on the walking stones. Later in the same walk, this politically poignant laneway building provided a significant contrast to the university architecture I'd seen earlier. The color and the message here overriding the orderly lines of this small building. Recording sounds is also worth doing. Certainly in urban environments, there are rich soundscapes to explore, but sometimes the most interesting ones are where human and natural environments collide. I captured the sound we're listening to now. Hopefully you can hear it in a ravine. It was quiet at first, which is what I wanted to capture, but then it all changed when some runners from a nearby school jogged past in small groups. There was a late straggler in the group. So I got sort of snippets of the quiet, the natural sounds of the ravine, and then more runners. And then a few seconds later, the last one went through. Here's the second group going through. After I left the ravine, it started to rain, so I captured some of that sound from under my umbrella, with the sound of wind and traffic evident in the background. It's interesting just to kind of pay attention to that as I'm doing it, being more aware of the sound of the rain itself because I'm recording it. I noticed the same thing yesterday. I was doing some recording in or walking through Koreatown, which is near where I live, and spending some time recording sound. And I did realize that I was paying more attention to what was occurring in the neighborhood because of the fact that I was recording it. It's not that I wouldn't have listened anyway, but the act of recording it for its own sake intensified my attention. Keri Smith also suggests walking the same route in different directions so you become aware of new details or develop new perspectives. A good idea to shake up your wandering practice is to choose a random area of your city or town on a map, then go and explore that area completely. You might do it in one wander, but you might also do it over several wanders. She calls this psychogeography. You make psychological and emotional connections with a place because you observe it and because you spend time with it. I found this painting screwed to a hydro pole in the annex last week, which is the neighborhood just east of where I live. Of course, I love the message, nothing changes if nothing changes. And when I first saw it on a long wander home after renewing my mortgage, I didn't actually take a picture of it. I enjoyed seeing it, loved it, decided for whatever reason not to take a picture of it. But I went back a few days later, and fortunately it was still there. No one had stolen it from the hydro pole. So I took a couple of pictures. Then, as I turned the corner onto the next street, I came upon two other interesting neighborhood details. The shot on the left, I don't actually know what budgie personality disorder is. I think it's funny, but I have no idea what it means. But I captured that shot anyway. And then just a couple of doors down from that hydro box, I saw on the back of a Prius this sticker in the window, which might be tricky to see, which says, "Be thorough." I love the kind of double entendre of that, be thorough, be thorough. But I also loved its resonance with this particular presentation. I was thinking about what I was going to say and how I would kind of string things together. So I thought it was a lovely message, if you like, from the universe to show me this sticker and to say, basically, keep going, you're on the right track. Smith suggests wanders of at least an hour, preferably longer. My wander into the ravine on Monday, where I captured those sounds, lasted about 2 hours. Yesterday's jaunt in Koreatown was shorter, but I left the subway a stop earlier than I normally would, following Shane O'Mara's lead to, get out and get a few more 100 or 1,000 additional steps in. Keri Smith also suggests a variety of activities in which you might leave things in random locations for other people to find, such as WANDR Society symbols or reading materials, writings from Whitman and Thoreau, which are available to download and print on the book's website. I haven't done this kind of thing yet, but it's one of Smith's ways of encouraging the development of a community of wanderers, however anonymous that may be. It is worth noting that Smith is a contemporary artist, and the idea of the WANDR Society is her creation. It doesn't appear to have existed as a formal historical organization, even though she references Whitman, Thoreau, Wittgenstein, and other people. Instead, it's something she's conjured in the context of creating her art project. Even so, I think the idea of the WANDR Society has merit because it encourages individuals to develop their own wandering practice, but also suggests that society as a whole would benefit in many ways if we all undertook this kind of attentive engagement with our environments. Keri Smith also suggests a library wander, in which you ask the librarian what their favorite book is and then read that one. Or you go to a particular shelf, pick a random book off of it, and choose to read it. This is similar to how I discovered the WANDR Society in the first place, actually, at one of my favorite bookstores, Fanfare Books, in a small city called Stratford here in Ontario. I like to peruse the discount bins they have outside when I'm in town, and one day in the summer of 21, I saw a copy of the WANDR Society. I opened it randomly. I was intrigued by what I read, largely because it described how I'd been living for most of my adult life, this kind of rambling, wandering pursuit of things. So I decided to buy the book. In this case, as in many others, it's a situation of solvitur a pasco. It is solved by browsing. To summarize, wandering has taught me to look for connections where I'm not expecting them, to pay attention to everything that happens around me because I don't actually know where the next connection is going to come from. I don't know which two ideas, which two events will sprout a connection. The world offers you connections, but you have to be present. You have to present yourself to the world in order to recognize and foster those relationships. And that ultimately is what creativity is: the recognition of relationships, the discovery and making of patterns, the drawing together of seemingly disparate ideas or things, and the integration of those new relationships and discoveries in your work. It's what I did actually to create this presentation. I paid attention to the linkages that presented themselves to me after I decided that this was going to be my topic. I simply wandered, physically in the world, but also mentally and intellectually. Things floated into my awareness, and I let the connections among them emerge naturally. I trusted the world, I wandered, and the world showed me a path. So, some questions for you then. What, if any, are your experiences with wandering? What particular practices do you follow when walking or traveling, for that matter, a similar kind of experience? And what connections have you made between your wanders, your travels, and your own creative work?
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in. I definitely didn't realize that I've been practicing this kind of concept of wandering for ideas. And I can't remember, there was a book I read a long time ago in college called, it was about creative flow and how when we're doing something like walking, jogging, swimming, we have the best creative flow. Like there's something about like your body physically doing something and your mind is just so much clearer. Yeah, I definitely have to take longer walks because I only do like 15 minutes and I'm like, I could have thought of more.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good point. It's your body's really only, well, then your mind actually is only
Mhm.
really getting into the flow at that point. When I
Yeah.
walked on Monday, I was not scattered, but I was a bit anxious and I could just feel the
Mhm.
stress. And it took me easily 20 minutes of that walk to just
Yeah.
sort of calm down and stop thinking about all these other things and then just become present with where I was. And then it
Mhm.
was fine. And that's when it really became useful and interesting, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I know. I'm like taking a mental note. Okay. Shoot for an hour. Shoot for at least an hour.
well, and the funny thing is we think, oh, I don't have an hour to do this, but
Mhm.
what are you doing otherwise in that hour? Right? Like, is it
Yeah.
truly productive? Like, one of the things I've come to
Mhm.
over the years is just simply spending more time on something doesn't make you either more creative or more productive. You just
Yeah.
need to, use an appropriate amount of time, but don't waste time. So if you're just going to sit
Mhm.
there looking at YouTube videos and whatever blogs you're interested in, please
Yeah.
leave the house, go out and start walking. And I mean, it's sort of antithetical for me to sit here and say this to people who work for a tech company, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I think it's actually true, right? Like you have to
Yeah.
get away and just engage the world more directly. So I mean, when
Mhm.
I say that I figured out what I was going to talk about while I was out walking around, because I was aware that things were coming into like I read the New York Times a fair bit, clearly enough, but those articles that I referenced were articles
Mhm.
that appeared on their website after I told you that I wanted to talk about wandering. And it's
Oh,
like, oh,
yeah.
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, interesting. Here's some guy talking about the power of going for a walk. Great. Anybody else want to chime in with any experiences, walking or otherwise, however mundane you might think they are? They're probably really the stuff of what we're after, even your travels. Do you have any particular rituals or routines you follow when you arrive in a new place?
I just figure out, actually I tend to do the pictures a lot. Like I'm I'm walking or I see something or whatever I do, I just see something and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna take a picture now. And then I don't use it actually. I just tend to have them there and don't use them like for anything. But I have the pictures there. And actually yesterday I was um like walking through a park. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of like a park. And I was like, oh my God, this part is like so beautiful, like this view. And then I took a picture. It was not that beautiful, but then that reminded me of the beautiful view I was having, not by the picture, but then I remembered. And yeah, so I just when I was hearing you, I was like, yeah, I tend to do that a lot, like without even noticing. Like I do that wandering part with not knowing, but actually, yeah, like catching inspiration from the surrounding, like taking pictures, and then I don't tend to do like the sounds or the videos too much, but I tend to do the pictures, and it was like yeah, it was it was a happy place for me now. I was like, yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, well, then what's interesting is that I mean, at least from the point of view of a wandering practice, it doesn't really matter if you do something with those pictures. That the point was that you took the picture, and the picture heightened your presence. The taking of the picture heightened your presence in that environment, in that moment. And then, as you say, Brenda, when you look back at that picture, you recall, I think, the feeling you had, maybe the intensity of your engagement with that environment while you were taking the picture. I think that's actually what goes on for a lot of us when we take photos and think about photos. They're drawing us back to an experience we had. It's not so much about the documentation of it and sharing that. It's really about the recollection of experience. So yeah, it's good. Now you can do more of that sort of thing.
Yeah, now I can try to do something about the whole picture, like the bunch of pictures I have on my cell phone.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you could, right? Like you could then turn it into a creative output of some sort, but even that's kind of beside the point, right? It serves its own purpose in that moment, and maybe it sharpens your creative instincts or your ability to make connections in other ways, right? So kind of like what I was saying about, oh, I'm now aware that there's connections between sources of information. So I'm able to do that. But why am I able to do that? Well, because I wander around and I notice things that are interesting and maybe connecting in whatever environment I'm in. So it's not even that I bring those any visual or sound evidence from those experiences into some other creative practice. It's just I'm sharpening those skills, if you like, if we want to try to make it practical and productive. You can practice this now. You can set up a new Slack channel and have people comment and post pictures, post sounds, like even give yourselves challenges in a sense, right? Like, okay, it's like the beginning of Instagram, right? Instagram was all about these weekend challenges back 14 years ago when it started, where it's like, okay, people, here's the photography challenge of the weekend. Go out and shoot these things and then post them on Monday. And so a real kind of community was developing, but you could do that kind of thing, right? Where without necessarily putting time constraints on people, just say, while you're doing what you're doing, just begin to treat it as a wandering practice. It's simple things like you're on the way home from somewhere. Do two things. One, take a different route, as Keri Smith said. Just turn down a street that you don't normally turn down, and trust an instinct that says, "Oh, what about this street?" Just do it, right? And don't ask why. Don't worry about what's going to happen. Just do it. And, you might end up taking another 10 minutes to get home, but you've had this additional experience. It's not 2 hours, but it's something, right? It begins a process of a different kind of engagement with the place you find yourself right now.
Yeah, sure. So, we were super excited about this Lunch and Learn and the topic, such as the wandering part. And I think there was so much talk about it and so much to think about. We were all like, I think, like wondering and thinking about all the things that you said. Thank you so much for being here. We're super grateful, and we're super happy to the content and everything that I was super excited because I saw you excited. So that's the best part of this. And so thank you so much for being here and for sharing all these like creativity and knowledge and experience in your path of creativity, to have like out of the box, like thinking and everything. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all the Wanderitos that are here. And wonders
it's a great I love that name, actually. It's great. If you want, Brenda, I could actually send you a list of the sources for my presentation, like links to the articles and that kind of thing, just in case people were interested in checking some of them out for themselves. But that might be useful. I can do that in an email.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, that would be perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Keep me posted on what you do. Like, you know,
Sure.
if you
We
set up a
will,
new
yeah.
channel of people's, you know, the evidence of their wanderings or something, just drop me a note and let me know.
Yes,
Sure,
we
we'll
will
send you some
definitely
pictures.
share.
We have a lot.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll have
thank
to
you.
download
yeah.
Slack.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Peter.
No worries.
And everyone, have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of your Friday. All right. Bye,
Okay,
everybody.
take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.